know why you're happy tonight. Only 18 days. And you'll stop getting texts that say, Tim Walz here. Of course, we're spared mostly here, right, in California, because we're not a swing state. So, you know, Los Angeles, you barely know there's an election going on. I do see a lot of yard signs. Of course, they all say armed response. But, I will concede I am a bit anxious. And that's the difference between me and Trump. I will concede.
That's a portion of Bill Maher's monologue on his long-running show, Real Time, from last Friday. Joe was a guest on that show with Mark Cuban and activist David Hogg. Then afterwards, Joe took his turn asking Bill questions in a sit-down interview. It was revealing. They talked about the war in the Middle East, wokeness, and why he's not shy about criticizing the extreme left as well as the right. Take a look.
Bill, thanks so much. How long have we been doing this? I'm serious. What has it been?
I don't know. Well, you were on Politically Incorrect, right? That was the 90s when you were a congressman from Florida.
The 90s, exactly. And first show I was on, this guy stands up and points at me. He goes, "You're a racist."
Who's that? Who was it?
I forget who it was. And then you defended
me.
Did he
mean it?
Of course he meant it. But
well, he's a comedian.
I was from the South. He's a comedian. I wasn't insulted by it. I bet you stood up for me.
Well, that is a fundamental problem we've had for a long time. Right. Well, two problems. One, there are racists in the Republican Party, as many people have. Well, I mean, there always have been. There used to be more in the Democratic Party. They were the Dixiecrat. But as someone once said, you know, is every Republican a racist? Of course not. But if you're a racist, that is the party you're going to gravitate toward. But also there is a big problem of calling every Republican a racist and calling everything racism. That goes on the left, you know? I mean, we were talking about on the show.
You're saying it's both sides,
well,
there is no doubt.
There's no misinformation.
There's some disinformation from the left. But comparing it to what Donald Trump spews out every day, every week, comparing it to what Elon Musk is spewing out, unfortunately, on X, there's no...
You were like, Bill, how can you, Mr. False Equivalency? It's like, no, Joe, come on. I thought you were Joe Scarborough. There's crazy on both sides.
There's crazy on both sides.
Not as much on the left at all, but, you know, I don't pause at calling it out.
No, you don't. What I noticed when I first came here, your audience was overwhelmingly Democratic. I would say something, and maybe one guy in a NASCAR shirt in the back would clap for me.
Correct.
Right? That's changed through the years. I can talk to conservatives, who I still talk to, and I can talk to conservatives who have a worldview like mine, and they watch you because they like how you speak out against the excesses on the left.
Yeah. I mean, look, I wrote a book about this year. And the theme of it, really, I mean, it was a lot of our old editorials that we had done, reworked, but basically the same ones. And I went through them purposely to see, have I changed? You know, people do. Or have things changed? And it's mostly things. The left wasn't as crazy under Bush and Obama. They just weren't. And I was not going to hold my tongue when they went to places where, I mean, you know, college kids marching for Hamas. Don't tell me there hasn't been a change.
Right.
And the victim culture, the cancel culture.
I will say this, though. As far, listen, I agree. There's been a change on the left. But let's just talk about Hamas for a second. Let's talk about college campuses. I remember back when I started Scarborough Country in 2003, we were talking about the radicalism at Columbia, the anti-Semitism coming from the college professors. I don't know that that's changed that much. I think there's been anti-Semitism at elite colleges for a really long time.
I don't think it's rooted in anti-Semitism. I think it's rooted in anti-colonialism and their erroneous view that the Israelis are colonizers, you know.
Like, somebody should really tell them that, like, European colonialists killed 6 million of them not too long ago.
Exactly. I mean, that's just part of it, but certainly that's a relevant thing to bring up. But, you know, colonialism, which now is mostly a thing of the past in the world, due to the work of other generations, But these kids come along and they want to get rid of what they, I guess, assume is the last vestige of it. You know, it's anti-historical. The Jews were there 700 years before Islam even existed, or more, probably 1,700 years, but certainly the temple was built a long time before Islam came along in the 7th century, 6th century. There's always been a presence there. There was a UN resolution that said divide the land. One group went with it. One group never has agreed to it. And let's be honest, a lot of that is because the Quran says Jews bad. I think we could solve this if that wasn't, you know, if that wasn't a big part of like why they hate having them in that region. Most people around the world that have territorial disputes, it doesn't go on forever.
Right.
At a certain point, they come to some accommodation. Not everything is fair, but I mean, you don't see the Mexicans trying to take back Phoenix, although they could. They could make the claim. They did have it at one point.
So we could talk about Israel for the entire time here, but I want to get back to you haven't changed. So you consider yourself a liberal, right?
I consider myself an old school liberal. You have to make that distinction now because, you know, the word woke, which started out as a good thing, being alert to injustice, and a lot of people get triggered by the word because when they hear it, they think of it the old meaning, which was good.
Right.
You know, stay woke. But I'm sorry, language is a living, breathing entity. Words change and they migrate and they take on a different meaning. And woke now has to answer for, or for people have just used the word to ascribe a number of extreme things on the left. I mean, I was talking about it in the editorial tonight. I mean, Kamala's big, I think, challenge here to win over the undecided voters is to convince them that she's not part of what they suspect she might be, sort of a stealth version of the worst excesses of the left. I said there's a coalition of Trump voters, people who really like him, they certainly are those, and then there's people who don't necessarily like him that much, but they still think he's less crazy than stuff that strikes them as aggressively anti-common sense. That takes place on the left. So that's why they keep running that ad about sex changes in prison. You know, like could you...
And every football game.
Could you get every
every football game.
Could you get more third rail words into one sentence than sex change operation,
sex change operation, taxpayer funded,
illegal, prison.
It rings every single bell.
They just want her to say, look, I get this about the blue team. And it's on my to-do list.
By the way, it's very easy to say. Yeah, I said that in 2019. I was in a competitive thing. Now, she did say, I think she said this was the law under Trump, too. He didn't change it. But it's very easy to say, I don't believe that anymore. And on that issue, she should. I wanted to ask you, so you're an old-line liberal.
I think so.
I'm an old-line conservative. I still believe in the balanced budgets, a strong southern border, a tough reaction to military aggression from Russia, et cetera, et cetera. And yet you and I find ourselves, I think, more in the same place because of the extremes on both sides. Talk about how crazy things have gotten and how we got here.
Well, that's it. I feel like I speak for a different group of people. You ask why the audience is different. That's why. Because I want a group of people who are not ideologically captured by either side. I am tired of the extremes and the extremists who dominate the debate. They have the megaphone, and we hear them more, but I don't think they represent what most people in the country talk about. I think almost any issue you could actually come up with a reasonable middle ground. In the overtime segment tonight, the subject of race and we were talking about young men who are now like in college, the ones who are going to need affirmative action. You have to, on the one hand, understand you benefited from racism if you're white. There's no doubt about it. And that has to be addressed. It can't be ignored. But also, I didn't personally do it. There's a middle ground there. It's very difficult.
Two things can be true at one time.
And they are both true at one time. I'm not personally responsible, but did I benefit? Yes, I'm sure I did. People our age definitely did.
Right.
And so if we can all agree on things like that, we could then come up with sensible policies. But that's not where the interesting.
Isn't that I think that's the biggest problem when you look at young men who are turning maybe more extreme in some cases, this sense of collective guilt. You and I can look back, everybody should be able to look back and see how we did benefit from some really unfortunate things that have happened throughout history, but you don't apply that collective guilt to a 7-year-old kid showing up at school.
And also, I keep saying on this show, let's live in the year we're living in. You know, the year 2024 is just very different.
Right.
Very, like night and day different from 50 years ago, even probably 20 years ago. And how well you do and things that happen to you that are good or bad, there's a whole constellation of reasons. Race is certainly one of them, probably in America, maybe still the biggest one, but it's not the only one. And sometimes it works in your favor in this modern world that we live in. Not always. And there's still absolutely racism, and there always will be racists, just like there will always be criminals and other idiots. But let's live in the era we're living in. Let's go by the way the world is now. And some people don't want to do that. It's funny, in that book I was talking about, there's a couple of chapters on how much alike, really, the two sides are. For example, they both don't want to live in the present. Donald Trump wants us to take it back to the 1950s or whatever. I mean, everything is about make America great again, and it's about this past idyllic world. But sometimes on the left, they don't want to acknowledge progress because it interferes with virtue signaling. Right. To say, we've come a long way, which we have.
It's okay to say that.
It's okay to say it,
okay.
But somehow you're a better person if you say, but there's work to be done. Of course there's work to be done. There's always work to be done. We're humans. We're on Earth. There's always going to be work to be done. But let's be realistic about where we are.
All right. Bill,
yeah,
thank
great
you
to
so
see
much
you.
for doing this.
Okay.
Great to see you.